Welcome back to the Koccolay Channel. This mega prison in El Salvador can hold up to 40,000 inmates, but life inside is uncomfortable due to overcrowding. Each cell has 80 metal bunks for 100 prisoners, leaving 20 people to fight for a spot on the cold hard metal with no blanket or pillow. The prison's overcrowding raises questions about why a high-tech mega prison would have such conditions. However, the story of the prison is more than just a tale of incarceration. It's a story of corruption, violence, and an attempt to contain the nation's long-standing problem with terrorism. The new mega prison is a massive facility surrounded by a high wall, electrified fence, and guard towers. Upon entry, visitors are scanned for contraband and have no communication with the outside world. 600 soldiers and 250 police officers provide security, while dozens of cameras monitor the inmates around the clock. Each cell houses 80 metal bunks for 100 inmates, with no mattresses, pads, or blankets allowed. The prison prioritizes punishment over rehabilitation, with the government aiming to make the lives of the inmates a living hell. The prison has amenities like dining halls, exercise rooms, and ping-pong tables, but they are only for the guards, not the inmates. The prisoners are only allowed to leave their cells for court or punishment in solitary confinement. Guards are armed with deadly force and won't hesitate to use it. This harsh reality is just the beginning of the struggles faced by those imprisoned in El Salvador, where survival is a daily battle. Despite being hailed as an essential element in the fight against gangs, one wonders if the gigantic prison truly lives up to its promise. El Salvador's prison system is plagued with mass incarceration, brutal conditions, rampant violence, and severe overcrowding, with the highest incarceration rate in the world. By 2021, the country's prisons operated at over double capacity, with La Esperanza, the largest prison, holding over 30,000 inmates in cells designed for just over 10,000. In March 2022, El Salvador witnessed its most violent 24-hour period since the end of the Civil War, with 62 brutal murders, later rising to 87 deaths by the end of the week. The MS-13 and Barrio 18 gangs were held responsible for the homicides. The government's response to recent violence was to declare a national state of exception. The emergency law suspends the right to an attorney and allows law enforcement officials to make arrests without a warrant. Over 63,000 suspected gang members were arrested, overwhelming the justice system. Police and soldiers conducted door-to-door searches, and drones were used to track suspects. The new mega prison was built to accommodate over 63,000 prisoners, despite its designed capacity of 40,000. Prison overcrowding and gang members' control could lead to violence, with many murders ordered from behind bars. The Human Rights Commission of El Salvador's director predicted this outcome, where human rights are stripped away for a brutal struggle for survival. The government's anti-gang measures and detention methods have come under scrutiny for inhumane conditions and mistreatment of inmates. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have expressed concerns about the lack of basic human rights for prisoners in El Salvador, including medical care, basic hygiene, and allegations of torture. El Salvador's prison system is overcrowded, and prisoners are served food in their hands. Raquel Caballero of the Attorney General's Office for Human Rights in El Salvador reported on the harsh reality of the country's prison system, where the line between punishment and torture is often blurred. Prisoners in the extraordinary measures facility lack basic human rights and dignity, with stories of medical neglect and suffering from chronic diseases. An ex-convict recently released from the facility shared his experience of overcrowding and unsanitary conditions, with inmates sharing a clogged bathroom and receiving food in plastic bottles or their bare hands. Since the state of exception began, things have worsened with many violations of human rights and over 80 deaths of those arrested during the crackdown. Both men and women, young and old, are among the deceased. A government source told the Cristosal Salvadoran human rights group that inmates were dying daily, with their deaths attributed to natural causes. However, there are no investigations or autopsies conducted, and families of the deceased usually find their loved ones with bruises when retrieving their bodies. The circumstances raise questions about what kind of natural causes could cause such injuries. President Kel's extreme measures against gang violence in El Salvador have resulted in a significant decrease in homicide rates. Despite the severity of his tactics, the people of El Salvador are supporting him and his iron fist policy. This is likely due to the fact that they have endured decades of violence, beginning with the Civil War from 1980 to 1992. The gangs in El Salvador are not major players in the drug trade, but instead earn their money through extortion of all members of society, including vulnerable individuals such as pregnant women. The people of El Salvador are tired of living in fear and are willing to support any measures that will bring an end to the violence. The El Salvador government's crackdown on gangs has opened a new chapter in the country's history of crime and violence. The effectiveness of the new mega prison in addressing gang violence remains uncertain, as concerns about mass incarceration and human rights violations arise. While the government's efforts are applauded, the punishment doesn't always fit the crime, and justice seems out of reach. It remains to be seen whether this approach will resolve the problem or worsen an already complex situation. See you next time.